Good afternoon to you all. Welcome to one more of the panels dealing with European strategic imperative, as it says in its title, overcoming vulnerabilities in a fragmented and polarized global landscape. It sounds very serious, but situation, it's quite serious, I would say. There's no doubt Europe has always played a central role in international relations due to its political, economic and diplomatic influence. However, in the face of a fragmented world, the old continent must rethink its priorities in order to tackle the various crises. Europe needs to reinvent itself. Its adaptation to the war in Ukraine revealed a major strategic flaw. Europe needs to rearm itself. Collective security, once again, is a mantra. At the same time, Europe needs to continue with the energy transition, again simultaneously trying to reach one of its strategic aims, energy sovereignty, as much as possible. The United Kingdom withdrawal from the European Union and the rise of Eurosceptic parties is quite an important moment, and in quite a number of rise of Eurosceptic parties, and European Union is weakening because all of that. Europe's presence in Africa is being challenged by the emergence of new regional players, requiring a foreign policy that is more adapted to the new continental dynamics. Europe must also readjust in the face of geopolitical crises in the Middle East. The latest events in Gaza Strip would perhaps require some strategic and coherent EU stance after all. Last but not the least, Europe must maintain a strong position in research and innovation, artificial intelligence included, to avoid being left behind by the USA and China. Many questions, so strategic imperative is here. Mr. Lajčák, to what extent can Europe preserve its economic and diplomatic influence in the face of new regional and global players?
Good afternoon, everyone. We live in rough times, when politics has become transactional, and we should not forget that in this brutal game, Europe is the player who still believes in vision, in values, in rules, believes in multilateralism, believes in justice and solidarity.
Is that naive?
It's not naive, but it's not enough. And in the current situation, Europe has to deal with several big challenges. First of all, needs to build its own identity, because for years, I mean, ever since its establishment, Europe was relying on the US leadership and was basically, it's in the DNA of European leaders to follow the US leadership. And this is no longer given. And second, of course, Europe is exhausted because it's currently #1 supporter of Ukraine's peace, freedom, and independence. And of course, it costs enormously lot of energy, money, and political credibility. Now, the uncomfortable truth about Europe is that #1, Europe has relied too heavily on others for its own security. Namely, we have taken it for granted that the United States will always guarantee our security. Second, we thought that economic interdependence will bring more peace and more cooperation. But we found out that it also brings more vulnerability. During the times of COVID, we found out that the supply chains were broken. And of course, Russia's invasion against Ukraine showed how dangerous the energy interdependence on Russia can be. And #3, we underestimated the return of hard power. So Europe has always been the famous soft power. Europe believed that diplomacy, trade, and values will help to shape the world order, but right now it's more about missiles, about the drones, about cyber capabilities, about the willingness to use hard power. And that's why I would say the 3 lessons that Europe needs to learn and to act accordingly are responsibility instead of dependence, resilience instead of vulnerability, and credible power instead of just words.
Ms. Limits, this transition, thank you very much, Mr. Lajčák, for your first intervention. This transition from soft power to hard power, is it, of course, it is connected a lot with the war in Ukraine and everything that happened and the consequences of it. These days we are reading about the United States being prepared to recognize Russian control over Crimea and other occupied parts of Ukraine just to reach the agreement to end the war. How this has been perceived from the Baltics, where already plans of mass evacuations of inhabitants of big Baltic capitals have been done, and are you afraid that if really, as some analysts are saying, there would be a truce or peace agreement that would enable Russians to deal with their armed forces and military industry to strengthen it up a bit, that within 2 or 3 years we could be in a very awkward same position, being afraid of new aggression, notably on the Baltics?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for this question, which has so many different angles, and from my perspective, it does not have one straightforward answer. And why do I say that? First, of course, everyone is firm that this tragic war in Ukraine should be ended. At the same time, what we have seen at the moment that aggressor has received support from the US. At the same time, as a victim country, Ukraine is even more under the pressure than it has been because of Russia's aggression and war. And coming from a small country from Northern Europe, then of course from our perspective, the international law should be respected. We should not tolerate border changed by force, and we truly leaders of both continents agreed that we should work together to support international law, the Charter of the United Nations, and also that the borders are not changed by force. And I think that this is really something that we can together, that in the international organizations we stand together for the values.
Mr. Kovac, just to come back to what Mrs. Limits has said, this AU-EU summit in Luanda was under the theme Promoting Peace and Prosperity Through Effective Multilateralism. That's one thing, mentioning multilateralism. And the other, in the summit's final declaration, they insist on a world order based on international law and effective multilateralism. So do we have any multilateralism as we knew it, especially effective one? And how can we talk about those kind of statements or declarations when, for instance, especially in Africa, we have many countries and regimes that do not see a problem when it comes to Russia's aggression? So multilateralism and those kind of meetings that have those kind of vague or diplomatic messages, do they even harm much more than doing a benefit?
Thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'll try to be very direct and outspoken. Multilateralism is only effective if it is supported by the strength of the major world powers. Without that strength, it's wishful thinking. Unfortunately, that's reality. The war Russia wages against Ukraine is, to quote Mr. Rubio, so it's not Miro Kovac, it's the foreign minister, the Secretary of State of the US, is a proxy war. I'm just quoting Mr. Rubio. And we Europeans, we are logically on the side of the US, but it's still a proxy war. We don't have today one world order. we have more or less 3 different orders. We have one norm, international law, which is more or less respected or not respected, okay? And this international law is the result of an order imposed by the victors after World War II. So it's a Western-minded approach. Then we have this Western-led order, or the US order, to which we belong, Europe. And then we have an order which is coming into being, which is whose major purporters are China, Russia, and other powers, countries from the so-called global South. Countries not happy with the West not dominating world affairs. And we will see what will happen in 5 to 10 years, which order will in the end impose itself, or will we have still this coexistence of 3 different orders?
Could I back to this? You have mentioned proxy war. Europe was sidelined with the USA even prior to the previous administration, but the thing was that previous administration claimed that it's not a proxy war. So how would you assess all this period of time? Now it's going to be almost 4 years of war and aggression that started, by the way, with the annexation of Crimea in 2014. How Europe has handled the whole situation?
So, unfortunately, Europe has not matured, and there I agree with Miroslav Lajčák. So the first big test for Europe was the war of Serbia and the Yugoslav National Army against Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and in the end against Kosovo, okay? The first crisis manager was the European Community. And this crisis management failed. Then we got the Clinton administration, which inserted itself into the crisis, and in the end we had the Dayton Peace Accords, which were formalized 30 years ago in Dayton, Ohio. Okay, so the US helped settle a crisis in Europe, in the former Yugoslavia. I'm speaking as a former Croatian official, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Then we had the Ukraine crisis. In the first phase, we had the Europeans managing the conflict, Germany and France and the Minsk Accords. Without Poland, by the way, without Poland, and without the Baltic countries. And then Europe was against a new war, because we already had a war in 2014. It was against the war. Then Biden took over, and Mr. Trump said in the Oval Office the other day that it's his, I quote Mr. Trump, you may criticize me, but if you criticize me, you criticize Mr. Trump, which is legitimate. He said Biden pushed for the war to happen. Okay, I'm quoting Mr. Trump. Then we had the war, Russia started against Rook, and the second war, Russia started against Ukraine, and then there was a shift in the European position. Then the Europeans took over the narrative against Mr. Putin, okay, against Russia. And now we are stuck. Why are we stuck? Because we haven't shown enough innovativeness. Why is it possible that the Americans negotiate with the Russians? Why isn't it possible that we, of course, defend Ukraine? Because we did the same in Croatia. We were attacked by the Yugoslav National Army and by the Serbs in Croatia, who were instrumentalized by Belgrade, but we still had to negotiate with Serbia. We had to negotiate against the aggressor at that time, Mr. Milosevic. Okay? And in the end, we had a liberation offensives, 2 offensives, big offensives, and we had in the end we had the peace settlement. Why wasn't it possible that we at the same time we arm Ukraine, we help the Ukrainians, but we have negotiations? So we left out the diplomatic channel, and now we are unfortunately in a strategic mess.
Echo of those questions might come to Brussels or to some of the European capitals. What I would like to ask Mario now, to go a bit away from Ukraine, that is going to be, I'm sure something that we are all going to mention and tackle here. It's Mediterranean, or you could say as well southern flank of NATO and a very important basin and realm of European Union. Yesterday we celebrated Day of Mediterranean, by the way. In Barcelona there was a regional forum of ministers of foreign affairs of the Union for Mediterranean. Coming from Italy, the country that has made one of the most or the latest coherent plan regarding Africa, Mattei Plan so-called, how do you assess the new pact for the Mediterranean of this EU Commission? Could things be different on long term because there were some other initiatives before? And how strategic Mediterranean and the other side of the Mediterranean, it has North Africa and Sahel and Sub-Saharan Africa because of security, migration, economic, demographic reasons is for European Union on long term?
Merci Dragan. Alors, on peut dire comme ça pour aller vite. L'Italie, après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, n'a pas voulu souligner sa vocation méditerranéenne. Peut-être parce que Mussolini avait parlé beaucoup de l'Italie sur la mer, etc., Mare Nostrum. On s'est ancré au nord. L'Allemagne, la manufacture, l'industrie. Et l'Italie se reconstruit comme ça. En ce qui concerne les crises méditerranéennes, et en particulier la crise au Moyen-Orient, jusqu'en 1994, l'Italie s'est gardée en équilibre avec une flexion vers plutôt philo-arabe. Avec Berlusconi, ça change. Ça va plutôt vers Israël. Mais on est toujours avec un souci de garder l'équilibre. Autre chose, c'était la politique adriatique, mais je ne vais pas m'épancher sur la politique adriatique parce que l'Adriatique, la mer qui est entre l'ex-Yougoslavie, l'Albanie et l'Italie, c'est un chapitre à part, avec les relations que l'Italie a toujours eues avec l'Albanie, même au temps d'Enveroggia, donc en temps difficile, et avec la forme Yougoslavie. Tout change, surtout lorsque l'intérêt national change. Et quel est l'intérêt national? L'Italie devient le deuxième pays exportateur d'Europe, de l'Union européenne, et d'Europe en général, après l'Allemagne. On est arrivé à 600 milliards d'exportations. Donc on a besoin que la Méditerranée soit ouverte. Nous, on n'a pas de port atlantique, okay? Comme la France par exemple, ou comme l'Espagne par exemple, et bien sûr comme la Grande-Bretagne. Et donc, tout ce qui se passe à Suez et à Gibraltar c'est plus tranquille, c'est ici, mais tout ce qui se passe à Suez est important, et même à Bab el-Mandeb, en bas. Donc, quel est l'autre pays qui a le même problème? La Turquie. L'Italie et la Turquie commencent à se parler sur ça. Ils ont le même intérêt national stratégique. Pour nous, la mer Méditerranéenne doit être ouverte. S'il y a des crises dans le front sud, par exemple la crise algérienne des années 90, on cherche de ne pas trop se mêler, okay? Pourvu que le passage soit libre. Et naturellement, cela implique des bonnes relations avec l'Égypte. Après, en 2013, explose un autre problème, l'immigration, les boat people qui viennent du sud, après la fin de la guerre en Libye. Pour l'Italie, la guerre en Libye a été un désastre. Le gouvernement italien ne la voulait pas, mais n'avait pas la force de s'opposer à Sarkozy à l'époque, qui voulait cette guerre, aux Britanniques et à Obama qui l'a couverte. Et pour nous, la fin de la Libye, la fin de l'État libyen, la fin de Gheddafi, avec lequel on avait une relation suivie, difficile mais suivie, a été un désastre géopolitique. Sans État libyen, il y a eu les boat people, vous savez, et donc là, la droite et la gauche en Italie se sont regardées et ont augmenté la tension sur la politique migratoire en se ressemblant. Aujourd'hui, et on arrive au plan Mattei, c'est la fin de mon propos ici, l'Italie a évolué dans le sens qu'après la crise 2013, 14, 15 de migration, j'étais au gouvernement, on a subi une pression très forte et pas du tout solidarité européenne, surtout des pays du sud de l'Europe, Bon, l'Espagne avait son problème, mais la France a parlé beaucoup, mais n'a pas supporté, n'a pas soutenu l'Italie dans ce sens. Et donc, l'Italie a cherché d'imaginer une politique différente qui mette ensemble la question migratoire, la stabilité du Sahel et la relation avec l'Afrique, parce que nous avons intérêt à avoir le continent, en quelque sorte, comme partenaire commercial. Et le plan Mattei, c'est ça. Quel est le but du plan Mattei? Ce n'est pas l'énième plan Marshall pour l'Afrique. Non, c'est industrialisons, aidons les Africains à s'industrialiser, point. Ce qui n'est pas évident, ce que l'Europe n'a jamais fait vraiment. Je parle de la politique agricole. L'Italie n'a pas de grands champions nationaux, n'a plus surtout. Elle a une pléthore de petites et moyennes entreprises, et c'est avec ça, ou de mid-cap, comme on dit, et c'est avec ça que le plan Mattei cherche de trouver des connexions et des joint ventures avec les entreprises africaines.
Merci pour la première intervention. Teuta, perhaps to shift a bit away from this geopolitics, although this is very much geopolitics, it's research and innovation. That Europe is lagging behind the United States of America and China that are having polarized situation when it comes to R&D anyway and innovation. Where we stand in that regard on long term, what might be the role of Europe in race for innovation and research in cutting-edge technologies?
Very much for this very interesting question, and indeed this is not the first time that we have been discussing about what kind of world we are living in. And here in MEDays there have been so many panels in the previous years where we have discussed about this multipolar world. So I believe that there is now an agreement that we are not living anymore into just the previous bipolar world. So I don't want to discuss this part. I want to discuss mostly the fact that Europe today finds itself in a crisis because it was built during a bipolar world. So how do we tackle this difficulty? How do we tackle this kind of challenges that we see today? Because what happened in 2022 with the war in Ukraine was not just one vulnerability. It was a system, a structure of several vulnerabilities where Europe found itself that it was depending on other countries. So let me be clear about one thing. Europe is an economic power. It has influence. But influence does not mean power. This is, I can see it when I come here in Morocco, people speak fluently French, and you can see all around the continent what kind of influence Europe has been having all around. So has it exploited this influence? I do not believe so, and this is the big deal. This is the big issue, and it is such a pity to reach to such conclusions. So when it comes to innovation, we have seen that when we check all the initiatives, Europe has been a champion in terms of regulating, but regulation does not mean that you are ahead of your times. You should go beyond regulation. So one thing that we recognize to the EU is this regulatory power. So
somebody is saying that it's over-regulating too much some things as well.
It is too much, and I believe that there is an agreement even among the EU officials that now there is a need for a hands-on approach. So where do Europe stands today? The fact that it is depending so much, be it in innovation, be it in AI, be it on cloud infrastructure, Europe is founding or semiconductors. All this, Europe has been regulating, but it depends on other continents. It depends so heavily when it comes to security on US. It depends so much on the rare minerals, because of China. So you can see that if Europe today does not build partnerships, it is not going anywhere. It is another world that we are living in. So having a digital sovereignty is the #1 recommendation, together with the industrial co-production. And this, I believe, these 2 points will even respond to the society in the European Union, especially when it comes to this crisis that came after the post-industrialism.
Richard, from British perspective, across the channel, one would say, we have lived some time now after the Brexit. How does that look like from your point of view, you know, the impact of Brexit on Europe, and in what way this might have influenced or changed strategic position of the European Union?
Well, Brexit was a colossal strategic disaster, self-inflicted disaster for the UK. It's damaged our own economy. We've lost 4% of GDP, billions in economic growth, billions in tax revenue. You can see our Chancellor last week.
But Mr. Farage could be very easily the next Prime Minister.
Well, I don't think so. We can get on to that. I suspect he won't be, because I think he's at the top of his power at the moment with around 30%.
Many said that for Trump second time as well.
Well,
so,
I agree.
yeah.
And I never thought Brexit would happen, so I might be wrong. But I don't think we'll get Farage. Well, no, it was a colossal mistake for the UK, but it was also very damaging for Europe. We were one of the leaders in Europe. We were collaborating successfully with Europe, and we played a strong part in Europe. So Europe is obviously worse off without us, as they would all admit. But what we can do now, so we've weakened ourselves, we've weakened European unity. What we need to do now is work as closely with Europe as we possibly can until the time comes when we can rejoin Europe. I mean, this Labour government is obviously a big improvement on the disastrous Conservative governments we had that caused Brexit and then were totally incompetent. And Keir Starmer is doing his best. You know, he's renegotiated some kind of deal to remove some of the barriers to trade, particularly in veterinary products, and completely pointless red tape that was imposed as a result of Brexit and made it very difficult to import and export food products, for example. He's trying to get back into this defence deal so we can work together on defence manufacturing and production. The EU is not being very helpful on that because they want us to pay a fortune to get back in. But that will be solved so we can work together on arms manufacturing. And
is this the only
together.
foundation for the future bilateral relations between EU and UK?
Well,
Defence
I hope so. I mean, I think even the public that voted for Brexit, the opinion polls now suggest that a majority of the British public recognises that it was a failure and would go back in. The problem is that the Labour government doesn't dare propose going back in or doing anything to create a much closer relationship because they don't want to alienate their kind of core working class voters who both voted Labour and voted for Brexit. But all we can hope is that we work more and more closely together and show solidarity with Europe, and that the EU will be as cooperative as they can and forgive us a bit for this massive blunder, because we all need to stand together, particularly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the fact that we can no longer trust Trump, and the fact that we have this huge power of China breathing down our shoulder and exporting all its products to us.
If nothing, at the end of the day, with the burden of this strategic imperative on the shoulders of Europe, you are going to be our dearest first neighbor in the future. Least but not the last, former Montenegrin Prime Minister, because on the horizons of European Union, and this might not have been the case before the Russian aggression in 2022, again, enlargement is a sexy word. And you are first in line, they say, the closest one to make a deal and to enter one nice day quite soon into the European Union. Could you comment and give your assessment, taking into the account the enlargement process, but in the light of newly emerged geopolitical circumstances and situation on the Western Balkans, how does that look like from your perspective?
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised by the number of visitors to the panel, because it seems that people are still interested to hear what's going on in Europe, and that's very positive. Secondly, answering to your question, now hearing Mr. Byrne, UK exits, Montenegro enters. So it sounds like a real change.
I mean, it's the same leverage, isn't it? Yeah.
Contribution. But one in, one out. But I agree with you. It's very important, and it is probably almost at hand. And I agree with you that after the invasion on Ukraine, enlargement has become again an important word in real terms, not only nominally. You know, I was Prime Minister back in 2012 when we opened accession talks. So it's been already more than 13 years. But for those of you who don't know that, opening accession talks, it's not just like that. There's a lot of work before that. So actually the process began in 2003 with the Saloniki decision, and there was this feasibility study, and then Stability Association Agreement, then you're in your candidate status, then you open accession talks, then you run through all the chapters, then you have to sign an accession treaty, and then it's got to be ratified. So probably in case of Montenegro, if government's ambition is realistic to complete all the accession talks by the end of next year, and then accession treaty mid-27, and then all the ratifications, which usually take 2 years in normal circumstances, we're already almost 2030, 27 years. I think everybody is pretty tired, not of enlargement, but I think tired of the process itself. Because when we opened accession talks in 2012, soon after, and it was already a new approach, you know, focusing on fundamentals. It makes sense, rule of law, it makes sense, coming from the Balkan country, or coming from the Balkan region, it makes sense. But then there was the then Juncker's commission, and Juncker said, no enlargement in my term. And then there was another invention, French methodology, 2018, 2019. And then all of a sudden, due to the geostrategic change, enlargement has become very important. And now it seems that European leaders are willing to not make only decisions about Montenegro, but more than that. And I think that's really important. Because sooner or later, it's not a technocratic process. It is very much a geopolitical and strategic process, uniting Europe. So I really advocate not only for Montenegro to join, it would be a great thing, but I think also for Albania, for Moldova. I think it is extremely important not to end discussions about the future of Ukraine without very clear provision that Ukraine belongs to EU and very, you know, concrete term about when Ukraine should join, because then it makes it tangible. It is completion of a vision that should strengthen European Union. The problem with EU, as we see it, is obviously it is a very complex mechanism, and now it is also a discussion about how a country joins. It's been open. It's not only about whether you meet various So these are some of very important things going on. But I think what matters at the end of the day is this vision, which is very important, which in a way should contribute to what my colleague Miroslav Lajčák was talking about, building this important identity in the very complex multilateral world if you want to preserve your place as competitive and leading in some very important global policies.
If you feel tired or frustrated in the process, just ask and go to your colleagues from Macedonia to ask them how they cope with that. So,
another example
yeah.
of how it should not be done, because bilateralization...
Yeah, but perhaps Montenegro was lucky enough because of broader geopolitical circumstances to have this even speeden up the procedure and again to be in the scope with the enlargement process. Because who knows what would happen if there was not 2022 with the whole enlargement process. Mr. Lajčák, energy sovereignty. after 2022, we know the whole process, including energy transition, that European Union still has quite high on its agenda. Have we learned something or not? Because we see that these days some of the most vocal countries supporting Ukraine because of economic difficulties are thinking again to go back on Russian gas, not through third side, but very bilaterally. Can the energy transition and carbon neutrality, because we are talking about decarbonization still, coexist with the industrial development of Europe?
Yes, provided it's done in a smart way, and of course not at the expenses of Europe's competitiveness. When it comes to the energy transition, energy dependency, this is actually a success story because European Union realized that what we have taken for granted, that means a stable, continuous supply of oil and gas from Russia is no longer given, and that Russia is using energy as a weapon, and that the energy security is part of the broader security. And it was decided that European member states will end their dependence from Russian oil and gas, and this is happening. I mean, the percentage is going rapidly down, and with the latest program called Repower EU, basically the import of Russia's gas will stop by the end of 2027, that means as of 1st of January 28, and oil is coming after that. We have alternative routes, we have interconnectors all across Europe, so that there are many possibilities to import LNG from different regions. So
not just from the United States.
Not just from the United States.
Which would be, again, a bad mathematics. That means no energy sovereignty again.
That's what the United States would prefer, but we cannot replace one dependency with another dependency. We really need to have like choice of suppliers, and as we already have choice of routes. Yes, at the same time, European Union has had the ambition to be the leader in the green transition. Probably we have gone too far, and the European industries raised their voice saying that with the plan that was discussed during the previous Commission, Europe will lose its competitive edge, and it will be dangerous or detrimental to European industries. So right now, the correction is taking place as we speak, and our plans are being reassessed so that they do not do harm to European industry and to European competitiveness on the global scale.
Mr. Kovac, question for you as a good connoisseur of French politics and France as still, one could say, one of the pillars of European project. The other day, the new chief of staff of the French army, General Mandon, stated that Russia is preparing for a conflict with the West till 2030 and that France must be ready, I quote, to lose its children and suffer economically. We know that President Macron said couple of times already that France is endangered like never before from 1945 onwards. The new French security strategy was done, if I recall well, last summer, and it states that France is entering a new era. Knowing all this, and knowing what France still means for the European project, does Europe really rearms itself for war?
First of all, every state has one, Morocco too, every state has one key objective, one mission, and that is to protect itself. Every state must be able to protect itself, its citizens, from a foreign aggression. To be able to protect yourself, you need an army. We need armed forces. And this is something which has been neglected by many European countries. I was in 2015 in the States, I mean, also later, in a very prominent think tank, and they didn't speak very well about the British Army, but they spoke highly about the Australian Army because of not really caring enough about defense. Now things are changing, yeah? And now we are he spoke to the mayors, il s'est adressé aux maires de France, to the mayors of France. I'm not very happy because it creates the feeling as if Russia would attack tomorrow France. This is not realistic. I'll say again, every country needs to be able to protect itself. But if you look, for instance, at the American Threat Assessment Report, it's an annual report published by the American administration. I'm not now quoting the latest report by the Trump administration. I'm quoting the report of the Biden administration from 2024. At that time, you had a lady, Avril Haines, who was in charge of national security, okay? And there they say, in this report, that Russia will certainly not attack NATO member countries and EU member countries. And now creating such an atmosphere is bad, knowing that France has huge financial and fiscal problems. So if you want to serve voluntarily in the French army, you would earn 1,000 euros. Less than in Croatia. Our soldiers will earn 1,100 euros. In the German army, it's 2,600 euros. So creating an atmosphere of national threat and then not even being able to finance it and to motivate enough people is not the right approach. I presume, unfortunately, that this is also a domestic issue.
So it's easier to talk about war than structural reforms.
What the French need, basically, la France a besoin de réformes structurelles, des réformes structurelles sur le plan économique. And you cannot hide the problems you have by creating an atmosphere that you will be attacked by Russia.
Thank you.
The French have a good army, they have an efficient army, they had some setbacks in Africa, we know that, but it's still one of the best armies in Europe with the Brits. But creating such an atmosphere, to my mind, is not the right way.
Thank you. Mario, I will ask you as a security expert as well, with knowledge and experience, the thing in Gaza, humanitarian tragedy, because this is across the other side of the Mediterranean that Italy shares as well, has shown very clearly that there are divisions within the EU when it comes to solution of unsolvable problem, perhaps. And we had, in the meantime, some of the EU member countries that have recognized Palestinian state without waiting to the final solution with two states that everybody is supporting. So EU is quite divided related to Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And third, between this, one could say, historic cooperation with Israel and the desire, perhaps, of certain powers to recognize the Palestinian state and to help one way or the other things to be moved in some direction. What is your assessment? And please, so in this regard, everybody who has something to say, you could freely join to the discussion.
Alors, avant tout, je dois dire que, selon moi, bon, je suis très d'accord avec ce que vient de dire notre ami, aussi par le fait que l'Europe a une moyenne d'âge de 42 ans. Tu ne vas pas faire la guerre avec une population si âgée. Je crains aussi que tout ce bellicisme sert à l'industrie pour produire d'autres choses, etc. Bon, il y a une question économique légitime, hein, légitime. Mais le problème de la souveraineté, il faut être clair. La souveraineté, c'est quelque chose de très rare et de très fragile. À la limite, vraiment souverains sont les pays qui ont l'arme atomique, comme la Corée du Nord. Est-ce que nous voudrions ressembler à la Corée du Nord? Je ne crois pas. Donc, Mais on est en face à la mort du multilatéralisme, vous l'avez bien expliqué. Nous sommes en face à un système de minilatéralisme à la carte, disons comme ça. Mais c'est les trois grandes puissances qui ont commencé. Et Gaza, c'est un exemple. C'est la Russie qui n'est pas contente de la situation, elle voudrait retourner à ce qu'elle était, elle fait de la victimisation. Les États-Unis qui disent « Make America Great Again », il faut retourner à ce qu'on était, on ne sait pas où, les années 50, je ne sais pas. Et la Chine aussi, qui a ses problèmes, hein, parce que par exemple en Chine, il y a un chômage de jeunesse de plus que 20%. C'est la première fois dans leur histoire. Et la Chine voudrait être le copropriétaire avec les États-Unis du monde, et les Américains ne veulent pas. Ils voudraient prendre la place de ce qui était l'Union soviétique. Si les grands font ça, les petits et les moyens se sentent en mesure de faire la même chose. Tu ne suis pas les règles, c'est les grands qui ne suivent pas les règles, les petits vont faire la même chose. Le seul lieu où le droit a encore un sens, c'est l'Union européenne. Alors on peut critiquer et dire « Oh, l'Union européenne est lente », les Européens aiment beaucoup s'auto-flageller, hein. Elle est lente. Oui, mais chers amis, l'Union européenne est dans une bulle protégée. Et sa lenteur, c'est aussi protégeons ce que nous avons, parce que nous sommes les meilleurs à savoir que la politique de la force ne mène à rien. Nous avons provoqué 2 guerres mondiales. Ça a mené à quoi? Et alors, toute cette agitation internationale mènera à rien. Ce sera seulement... Les guerres sont devenues inutiles. Qui gagne plus une guerre? Même Israël, avec toute sa force, ne parvient pas à gagner une guerre. Même les États-Unis, à Gaza, qui a gagné? Personne n'a gagné. Tout le monde a perdu. Même Israël. Donc, la guerre, avant de dire que la guerre est illégitime, immorale, injuste, elle est inutile. Ça ne sert à rien. Et l'Europe protège son acquis. Peut-être c'est un peu égoïste, je suis d'accord. Mais il faut avoir toujours des bonnes relations avec ses voisins. Moi, je pense que la question de Gaza, pour arriver à ta question, Dragan, ne se résoudra pas s'il n'y a pas le calme. Maintenant, il faut la trêve imposée par les Américains. Très bien. On a vu Israël pratiquement un État contrôlé par l'Amérique totalement. Ça s'est renversé contre eux. Maintenant, ils ne peuvent plus rien faire. Ils ont voulu voter à la Knesset l'annexion. Ils ont téléphoné de Washington. Non, non, vous enlevez cette loi. Moi, je pense qu'en futur, il y aura 3 États, non 2, 3. Gaza, Cisjordanie et Israël. Peut-être ce n'est pas plus mal que ça, mais ça, c'est mon idée personnelle, hein, qui n'a aucune valeur.
La position européenne?
La position européenne est divisée. Mais les Européens arriveront quand il faudra redire le droit. Et aussi pour l'Ukraine, ce sera comme ça. On aura un stop, on aura une trêve, pas de paix, pas de solution, jusqu'au moment où les grandes puissances seront obligées à retourner sur les règles. Parce qu'elles aussi veulent les règles, veulent changer, mais elles veulent les règles. Ils ne savent pas encore exactement. Quand il s'agira de dire le droit, ils retourneront vers l'Europe. Et ça, c'est très fondamental. On dit USA innovates, China replicates, Europe regulates. Alors, ce n'est pas vrai que China replicates, parce que China maintenant innovates as the USA, mais regardez, le fait que l'Union européenne regulates, c'est très important. Et moi, je ne trouve pas que c'est overregulated. Moi, je trouve qu'on a besoin de règles, surtout aujourd'hui, quand il n'y a plus de règles, vous voyez comment nous sommes dans le chaos. Et le seul lieu où le droit international a encore un sens, c'est à l'intérieur de l'Union européenne.
Thank you. I have just one more question, and then we could perhaps give some room for questions from the audience, and then perhaps some of you that did not have the second intervention, if you think that you could share with us some of your thoughts, is the Iranian nuclear program, which as well, it's a huge problem for Europe, where Europe was involved in the agreement 2015, and because of the European stance of E3, so 3 big European countries, sanctions of the UN have been again on the table. there are expectations that there would be a new Israeli attack on Iran in January, so we might witness a new situation with enriched uranium that has been under rubble still. What might be, or how important is the European stance towards this, not just Iranian-Israeli conflict, but general nuclear threat? Would some of you perhaps comment that? Who feels free or knowledgeable? Miro.
I'm not very knowledgeable. I think I'm logical. Europe is a bystander. There are some negotiations, the Germans, the French, and the Brits, but Europe in general, unfortunately, is a bystander. And I agree with our Italian friend when it comes to Europe. The trademark of Europe is rule of law. Is a trademark of Europe. Okay, but then we have a discussion about taking Russian frozen assets. And if we didn't have the Belgian Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, who was courageous enough to explain what the danger is, if we do that in Europe, we take the Russian frozen assets, someone will say, okay, you Europeans, you speak about the rule of law, and then you take the frozen assets, okay, from a country. You mustn't do that. And the lady in charge, she wrote a letter to the European Council, to Mr. Costa, and all to the prime ministers and the president. Macron is also a representative of France in the European Council, saying what the danger is if we do that, okay? So we have to lead by example, okay? We must not take the frozen assets and then speak about being the beacon of respecting the rule of law in the world, okay? Then we have to lead by example. We cannot do that, and we will have a big problem when it comes to our competitiveness and about the security of assets in Europe in general.
Before to give the word, of course, to Ms. Limits, because I knew that there would be the response from that, from Baltics, I just want to say that in 2015, Europe, as well as Sideline, perhaps did something that states have not managed to do when it comes to Iranian nuclear program. And of course, in case of Ukraine and in many other cases, Europe is put aside these days, but perhaps Europe could do something in that regard instead of the Americans, because Iranians are refusing directly to talk with the Americans. Ms. Limits, I assume you would comment Mr. Kovac's stance regarding the frozen assets of Russia.
Thank you very much, and I truly want to say a few words on that very briefly, because I strongly believe that the EU should use those frozen assets to rebuild Ukraine.
But do we open Pandora's box then, in that regard, what Mr. Kovac has explained?
I wouldn't say so. I think it's valid everywhere where the aggressor has damaged civilian infrastructure, lives of people, then this aggressor is responsible for reconstruction. And therefore, I strongly would like to say or emphasize that those Russian assets, they are not taken away. Europeans, we don't want those assets, but we want them to be used to rebuild Ukraine.
Yeah, but the thing is, if I just may add that in the 90s, for instance, Croatia did not frozen assets of Serbia in that regard, which could have been done as well. And I completely understand the stance of Mr. Kovac, because then...
What we need, Dragan, if I may something, so it is acceptable only if it is part of a peace treaty. Yeah. If a peace treaty, it's clearly defined in the peace treaty, like the Americans did it in these 28 points, okay, that they would use the assets, and then if it's in a peace treaty, if it's ratified and signed, no problem with that. But taking the assets like that, without consent of the country whose assets are frozen, it would be also a breach of international law.
But that as well sounds like science fiction, knowing Russia's and Mr. Putin. Yes, Mario. Please, you want to add something? No? Or? So, are there...
Yeah. Your comments. You said very resolutely that Iran doesn't want to talk to Americans, but the most recent signals they've sent are actually the opposite. Mm-hmm. they've been coming down, the pressure, like morality police activities and so on, and they seem to be sending messages that they want to restart some communication.
Yeah, but not direct talks with Americans. I just came from Tehran, and not by imposing them 0 point of enrichment, which Americans are asking. So
that is a matter of negotiations, but they seem to be interested in restarting talks. So that's very different from refusing to engage in dialogue.
Perhaps any questions from the public, which I see quite a number of you here, because in the last panels they have said to us, give the floor to some of the people in the audience. No? Then I will go with this thing which has struck me a lot. It has with multilateralism that we have mentioned through the whole MEDays this year as well, but it has something to do with European energy transition and climate change goals as well. We have had now COP in Brazil and Belém with many difficulties, but one of the things that struck many of us is that in the final declaration there is no mentioning of carbon fuels. So two things. Are we losing something that even von der Leyen as chief commissioner or the first lady of the European Commission has put into her program for getting the place again of the President of European Commission? Are we losing this fight for climate change and multilateralism as such? With this event, was that the final end, that we are doing big events that should have multilateral agreements without having the real content into the declarations? Mr. Lajčák.
Well, it would be naive to expect that COP will deliver when the overall multilateral system is not delivered. Climate diplomacy is part of wider diplomacy, and we see that unfortunately, because I'm a career diplomat, that's why I say unfortunately diplomacy is failing. So we will improve the climate diplomacy once we will improve the state of multilateralism.
Green agenda of EU?
Not change the overall picture. What I want to say about COP30, of course it's a disappointment, but at the same time it's probably more honest. We are not lying to ourselves, because the previous COPs, adopted the final document, which was not implemented. And if there is one good thing about this COP, is that the countries of Global South played, I would say, decisive role, and the BRICS played an important role in shaping the discussion, which I personally see as a good thing, because I mean the world really does not depend on 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, so it's only good that the BRICS spoke out. This is the result. Okay, that's the mirror of the global reality. And we will not fix the COP before we fixed the UN system as such and the multilateralism.
I think we will wrap up with 2 questions for Richard and Teuta. Richard, coming back to this hardcore politics and geopolitics, many are saying that Britain after Brexit tries to impose itself in a bit neo-colonial way as well, make the Great Britain great again. Especially in defense and security, and making battles, especially with Russia in hybrid war in the Balkans or in this eastern flank of Europe. Do you think that this might be the case of returning Britain to the European continent in some other capacity than being a member of the EU? You have mentioned defense is one of the pillars of the future cooperation between EU and UK. Is there any capacity of current UK, not just government, but circles to be back again in a big style, fighting with Russians in Europe, for instance?
Well, I certainly don't think that Brexit made Britain great again. It made it weaker again, and was very damaging. And I don't think Britain is trying to find some new grand role in the world. Boris Johnson might have been, but luckily he didn't last very long. I think what Keir Starmer is trying to do, now that we're out of Europe, is establish pragmatic, long-term strategic relationships with all the world powers. I mean, to everyone's surprise, he's managed to build a good relationship with President Trump, so we've got a slightly better tariff deal than the EU, and we haven't had any major rows with the US. He's also changed the UK's strategy very sensibly towards China. He wants a pragmatic, or to use his words, a consistent, long-term and strategic relationship with China, where we benefit from trade and investment with China, where we also protect our national security and differ on values where we need to. And he's apparently going to go to China at the end of January, all things going smoothly. At the same time, he wants a closer relationship with Europe. So I think what the government is trying to do is not make Britain into some great new force in the world, but in pragmatically building relationships with the different power blocs with whom we trade and with whom we do business, and with whom we are aligned. And we are most aligned, actually now, given what's happened in the States, and looking at China and its system, we are most aligned with Europe. And I completely agree that Europe is the home So if it may not be the most powerful country militarily, or in terms of trade or innovation, I mean, I hope we will become better at innovation and build our own companies to sort of challenge some of those from China and the US. But we need to be the country that people look to. We need to be the regional group that the rest of the world looks to for integrity, moral values, the rule of law, decency. A region to look up to and want to be like. Because I don't think many people in the world really look up to Trump or China, and obviously not Russia.
Thank you. I did not ask you that by chance, because many are saying that everything that happens in Western Balkans now has a very recognizable British signature in many ways, in Serbia and Bosnia, in as well Kosovo. Coming back to this and ending up with Western Balkans, or the region of Balkans, Teuta, from perspective of Western Balkans, now with this enlargement process that again it's on the table, and we have heard so many times in the previous years that the European project never ever would be finalized or strengthened, or the European sovereignty would not be having the shape without including the countries of Western Balkans. How do you see perspective from that part of Europe having all or most of those challenges that we have mentioned, it from migrations, climate change, social cohesion that has been eroded as well?
Yes, indeed, the Western Balkans have been asked so many times, what can it bring in the table? So, yes, very often, one of the questions that was asked, like since new members now, let me mention, for example, Austria, Sweden and Finland in 94, when they became members, it was very fast. They brought a lot and made the EU even go faster in terms of green energy and so on. So what can we bring more to the table? Well, first of all, let's not forget that each enlargement round has made the EU be transformed, has made the EU to revise, to ratify the treaty, and to see like how it can adapt in order to welcome the new members. So it is a very mutual position. From one side, the candidate countries, they are there knocking on the door, in the door of the EU club, and on the other side we see that the EU itself needs to prepare for these new members. Well, so far we do know that the EU is a Christian club. So there are no Muslim countries so far. So one of the countries which is knocking on the door of the EU and which is majority Muslim is Albania. It is moderate Islam, so on and so forth, but 54% of its population is Muslim. 28% is Orthodox, Catholic, and atheist, and so on. So, indeed, how will the EU act in these terms? So these are new dynamics which will be in the doorstep of the EU. I believe that strategically the Western Balkans will offer all the possible perspectives related to the digital dependency and energy and especially security, as we've seen during the migration crisis.
And hopefully it will strengthen the resilience of the European project. Thank you very much to you all for participation on this panel. Thank you for the patience to listen. I hope that we have tackled some of the challenges that are defining Europe's strategic imperative. Have a good day.